Judge Andrew Paulton believed he could silence Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett with one sound of his gavel. At 75, the former television legal analyst turned federal judge had spent decades commanding respect. That morning in Washington, D.C., he walked into the courthouse certain that everything would go exactly as planned. The crowd filled every seat, reporters lined the walls, and the air felt heavy with expectation. Outside, people held signs about voting rights and fairness, but inside, Paulton felt sure of his power. He looked down from the bench and saw Jasmine Crockett standing confidently at the witness table. She had once been a civil rights attorney and was now a sitting congresswoman. Calm and prepared, she waited as the judge adjusted his robe and spoke. "Congresswoman Crockett, you've made strong claims about voter suppression in your state. I trust you have facts, not opinions." His tone carried the weight of authority. Jasmine opened her binder and said softly, "Yes, Your Honor, I do." Then she began to speak. Her voice was gentle but firm, her sentences short and clear. She explained how polling stations had been closed without warning, most of them in neighborhoods of color. She spoke about people who had to drive long distances just to cast a ballot. She gave numbers and evidence, not emotion. The judge watched her closely. He had expected a political speech, but instead saw the careful work of a lawyer who knew exactly what she was doing. He interrupted, trying to regain control. "Correlation is not causation, Congresswoman. You can't assume intent." She replied evenly, "I'm not assuming anything, Your Honor. I'm presenting data and internal emails that prove intent." The courtroom went still. Even those who had come expecting routine testimony began to lean forward. Something about her calmness was unsettling. Paulton cleared his throat. "This is a courtroom, not a campaign rally. Stick to the evidence." "Everything I've presented is evidence," she said politely, and continued. Reporters began scribbling faster, cameras clicked, and the judge's jaw tightened. She cited laws, statistics, and verified documents, each one painting a clearer picture of suppression. Finally, Paulton snapped, "That's enough. Your statements are bordering on politics." Jasmine closed her binder and looked straight at him. "If truth sounds political, Your Honor, maybe that says something about who feels threatened by it." Gasps filled the room. No one ever spoke to Judge Paulton that way. His face flushed red. "You will watch your tone. This court will not tolerate disrespect." "I meant no disrespect," she said calmly. "Only honesty." The silence that followed was deep. Then Paulton raised his gavel. "Congresswoman Crockett, you are out of order. I'm holding you in contempt of court. You will pay a fine of $1,000. The gavel came down with a sharp crack. The sound echoed through the courtroom. For a moment, no one moved. Jasmine stood still, her face calm, her eyes steady. Then she smiled, quietly, knowingly. "Your Honor," she said, "I accept your ruling. But before we continue, I have a few questions about the legal foundation of your decision." Paulton blinked in disbelief. "You're not in a position to question my rulings." "With all due respect, Your Honor, I am," she replied. "As a member of Congress protected under the speech or debate clause, and as a licensed attorney, I have the right and duty to challenge any order that appears unconstitutional." A ripple of surprise swept through the gallery. Reporters raised their phones. The judge's confidence wavered. "My testimony today," she continued, "concerns active voting rights legislation. Your contempt ruling may violate the separation of powers." Paulton tried to respond, but Jasmine kept speaking, her voice steady. "Before issuing your citation, did you consider your own public comments on this legislation? 3 weeks ago on television, you called it unconstitutional overreach that threatens election integrity. Did you say that, Your Honor?" The courtroom erupted in whispers. Paulton's jaw tightened. "My past comments have no bearing on this hearing." "Don't they?" she asked softly. "The Judicial Code says judges must avoid even the appearance of bias. You criticized the bill, and now you're punishing someone defending it. That's not just appearance, that's conflict." The gallery buzzed louder. Reporters typed rapidly, sensing a headline. Paulton tapped his gavel, but the room ignored him. His authority was slipping. Crockett spoke again, each word sharp and clear. "And one more thing, Your Honor. Before you fined me, did you disclose your financial interests related to voting rights litigation? The judge frowned. That question is out of line. It's very much in line, she said, lifting a tablet. Your own public filings show you hold nearly $1 million in stock in a law firm that has been paid millions to fight these laws. Should I read the exact number? Gasps filled the room. The judge's face turned pale. He looked cornered, unsure of what to say. That's irrelevant, he muttered. It's entirely relevant, she replied. The people deserve to know whose interests are being served when justice is handed down. Chaos broke out. Members shouted objections. Reporters ran for the door. Cameras flashed. Paulton banged his gavel over and over, shouting, "Court is in recess!" Then he stood quickly, turned, and left through a side door. For a moment, the room stayed frozen. The sound of his footsteps faded. All eyes turned back to Jasmine Crockett. She stood tall, quiet, and unshaken. Slowly, she closed her binder and placed it on the table. The energy in the courtroom was electric. Some people whispered that she had just destroyed a judge's career. Others said they had witnessed the purest form of courage. No matter what they thought, no one doubted that history had just been made. Outside, reporters gathered on the courthouse steps. Headlines flashed across screens. Judge faces ethics scandal after clash with Congresswoman. Inside, the echo of that single gavel strike still hung in the air. Janelle took a deep breath and looked toward the bench where the judge had sat moments earlier. What she had done was dangerous, but necessary. And she knew this was only the beginning. Because what was coming next would not just shake one man's career. It would shake the walls of Washington itself. The moment Judge Andrew Paulton stormed out of the courtroom, the whispers began. Reporters rushed down the marble hallway, calling their editors and filming quick updates. Within minutes, every major network had the same headline flashing across screens. Federal judge storms out after clash with Congresswoman over ethics conflict. Outside the courthouse, the crowd grew louder. Protesters waved signs. Camera crews pushed closer to the steps. Everyone wanted to know what would happen next. Inside the building, security guards escorted staff from the courtroom as clerks hurried to collect documents. Jasmine Crockett remained seated, calm but alert, her binder still on the table. She knew the storm had only started. By noon, social media was on fire. Short clips of the hearing went viral. Paulton's raised gavel, her steady smile, the words, "That's not just appearance, that's conflict." People replayed the moment again and again. Commentators on television called it the most shocking courtroom exchange in recent memory. Some praised Crockett for her courage. Others accused her of grandstanding. But regardless of opinion, everyone agreed on one thing. Something big was about to happen. In Washington, that kind of attention was never ignored for long. Back in her office, Janelle sat at her desk surrounded by stacks of files. Her phone buzzed constantly, calls from colleagues, messages from journalists, and emails from supporters. Her staff urged her to rest, but she refused. "This isn't about me," she said quietly. "It's about the truth." Her assistant handed her a tablet showing a live news feed. Commentators debated whether the judge's investment really constituted a conflict of interest. Crockett stared at the screen, then looked away. "It's all there in his filings," she murmured. "They can debate all they want. The facts don't change." Meanwhile, inside the federal judiciary's headquarters, quiet conversations turned tense. Senior judges met behind closed doors. Some argued the controversy would fade. Others warned that Paulton's past media comments might now be re-examined. One clerk whispered, "If those financial records check out, it's serious." Another responded, "They already do. She had the documents in hand." By evening, the Judicial Ethics Committee had received hundreds of formal complaints demanding an inquiry. That night, the judge sat alone in his study. The television across the room replayed the moment he slammed his gavel. His wife had gone upstairs, unable to watch anymore. The once proud legal scholar now stared at the screen in disbelief. He thought of all the years he had lectured about fairness and the Constitution, and now his own actions were being questioned. His phone buzzed again, Another call from his clerk, but he didn't answer. He poured himself a glass of water and whispered, "How did this get so out of control?" The next morning, the story had already grown larger. Front-page headlines read, "Congresswoman Crockett exposes judicial conflict in heated hearing." Outside his home, news vans waited. A neighbor waved awkwardly as cameras rolled. Paulton stepped out briefly to get the paper, trying to look composed, but flashes followed him all the way back to the door. Inside, he read the first line. The Judicial Ethics Committee confirmed it will review Judge Paulton's financial disclosures following yesterday's confrontation. He set the paper down and sighed. For the first time in decades, he felt powerless. Across town, Congresswoman Crockett prepared for interviews. She wore a plain blue jacket, her hair neatly tied back. "Keep your answers simple," her communications aide said. She smiled. "Simple is all I know." On camera, her words were clear and careful. "This isn't about politics," she said. "It's about accountability. No one should be beyond the law, not even a judge." Her sincerity struck a chord. Viewers who had never paid attention to congressional hearings suddenly tuned in. Calls flooded her office from people thanking her for speaking up. Inside Congress, leaders debated their response. Some wanted caution, fearing backlash from the judiciary. Others pushed for bold action. "If we back down now," one senator said, "we tell the public that power protects itself." The chamber buzzed with quiet tension. By late afternoon, an oversight committee voted unanimously to request all of Paulton's financial records. The motion passed faster than anyone expected. Back in the courthouse, clerks whispered that the judge might take leave for health reasons, but others insisted he was determined to defend his name. Paulton returned to his chambers briefly, avoiding reporters. He sat behind his desk, staring at the empty courtroom beyond the glass door. He replayed Crockett's words in his mind. "Whose interests were you protecting when you did it?" Each time he remembered, his stomach tightened. He wanted to believe he had done nothing wrong, yet deep down he knew her accusation had hit close to home. By the end of the week, investigators had begun to piece together timelines. The payments to the law firm, the judge's stock purchases, the televised statements, each piece formed a troubling pattern. News anchors spoke cautiously but pointedly. "The evidence raises questions about impartiality," one said. "If proven true, this could become one of the most significant judicial ethics cases in decades." Public opinion turned fast. Hashtags calling for transparency trended nationwide. Crockett stayed focused. She refused to celebrate or gloat. "This isn't victory," she told her team. "This is responsibility." She spent her evenings reading letters from ordinary citizens. Many wrote about the times they felt unheard or powerless in front of authority. One older man wrote, "Watching you stand there gave me hope that truth still matters." She folded the letter carefully and placed it in her drawer. "That's why we fight," she whispered. The pressure on Judge Paulton increased. Within 10 days, the Ethics Committee formally opened an investigation. Subpoenas were issued for his financial documents and correspondence. News stations set up live countdowns to the committee's announcement. Former colleagues appeared on TV, some defending his integrity, others admitting concern. Late one night, his longtime friend, a retired jurist, called him. "Andy, listen," the friend said softly. "This isn't going away. You need to come clean before it's taken from you." Paulton rubbed his forehead. "If I resign, I look guilty." "If you don't," the friend replied, "they'll make sure you are." While the media focused on the scandal, Janelle Crockett returned quietly to legislative work. She joined meetings about the same voting rights bill she had defended in court. Her colleagues applauded her composure, but she reminded them, the real issue is still voter access. That hasn't changed. Still, she couldn't ignore the growing spotlight. Every move she made was dissected by commentators. She received both praise and threats, letters of gratitude and letters of hate. Through it all, she kept her calm tone. "Fear only wins when silence grows," she told her staff. One evening, as she left the Capitol, a reporter called out, "Congresswoman, do you feel vindicated?" She paused at the steps, turned slightly, and said, "This was never about winning. It's about reminding people that truth has a voice." The clip aired that night and became one of the most replayed moments of the week. Her approval ratings soared. Behind the scenes, however, the stakes were climbing. Leaked documents suggested that Palton's investments might connect to multiple political cases he had ruled on in past years. The revelation spread like wildfire. Commentators predicted resignations. The Department of Justice quietly announced it would review potential criminal conflicts. The story that began with one contempt fine now reached the highest levels of government. Judge Palton felt the walls closing in. Each morning brought new headlines, each one worse than the last. He avoided his courtroom entirely. Rumors circulated that he had hired an attorney of his own. Friends stopped visiting. Even his longtime clerk avoided eye contact. Alone in his office, he stared at the same gavel that had once commanded silence. Now, it felt like a relic of lost authority. He whispered to himself, "One decision, one moment, and everything changes." At the same time, across town, Congresswoman. Crockett stood at her window watching the city lights. The Capitol dome glowed faintly in the distance. She knew this fight was bigger than one hearing or one judge. It was about restoring faith in institutions that too many people had stopped believing in. "Tomorrow," she told herself softly, "the truth will speak louder than power." Her phone buzzed. Another message from her legal team. The ethics committee had scheduled an emergency session for the next morning. The news broke before sunrise. Every network switched to live coverage. Anchors announced that Judge Palton would appear before the committee to answer questions under oath. Crowds gathered outside the courthouse, the same steps where Janelle Crockett had walked out just 2 weeks earlier. Inside, cameras waited for the moment he entered. As he walked down the corridor, the same reporters who once quoted his opinions now shouted questions about corruption and conflict of interest. His face was pale, his shoulders tense. In his hand, he held the same gavel, perhaps for comfort, perhaps as a reminder of who he used to be. When he reached the hearing room, he paused at the door and took a deep breath. At that very moment, Janelle Crockett stood in her office watching the live broadcast. Her assistant turned to her. "Do you think he'll admit it?" Janelle didn't answer right away. She watched the screen as the judge adjusted his microphone and looked up at the panel of investigators. Finally, she said quietly, "He has 2 choices now, truth or downfall." The chairman of the committee cleared his throat and began the proceedings. Cameras zoomed in. Millions of people watched across the country. The judge's voice trembled as he started to speak. "I want to set the record straight," Judge Andrew Palton said, his voice trembling slightly as cameras focused on him. The room was so quiet that even the faint click of a pen sounded loud. He looked down at the papers in front of him, then up at the panel of investigators. "There have been many claims about my integrity," he continued slowly. "Some are exaggerated, some are false, but some deserve an honest answer." His hands shook as he adjusted the microphone. "I did invest in Brennan and Associates. At the time, I did not believe it created a conflict. But looking back, I understand how it appears." Gasps rippled through the room. Reporters began typing furiously. The chairman leaned forward and asked, "Judge Palton, are you admitting that you failed to disclose a conflict of interest?" The judge hesitated, his lips trembling. "I'm admitting," he said, "that I should have known better." The sentence hung in the air like a confession. Cameras zoomed closer. Across town, Congresswoman Janelle Crockett watched from her office. She didn't smile or celebrate. She simply whispered, "The truth always comes out." Back in the hearing room, one investigator asked if the judge's television statements had influenced his rulings. Palton exhaled slowly. "When I was on TV, I believed I was only sharing legal insight. But I see now that my words carried weight I didn't intend." He paused, his voice softer now. Judges are supposed to rise above bias. I failed to do that, the crowd murmured again. The chairman nodded grimly. Judge Paulton, this committee will deliberate. But your admission is on the record. Paulton lowered his gaze, folded his hands, and whispered, Understood. As he stood to leave, flashes from cameras lit his face. He looked smaller than the man who once commanded silence with a single strike of the gavel. Reporters shouted questions, but he said nothing. When he stepped outside, the wind whipped at his robe. For the first time in years, he felt ordinary, just another man facing the consequences of his choices. News of his statement spread instantly. Across the nation, talk shows debated what would happen next. Some called him brave for telling the truth. Others said he had only confessed because he had no choice. Editorial headlines read, Judge Paulton admits misconduct. Public trust tested again. Comment sections filled with anger, relief, and disbelief. The conversation had moved beyond one courtroom. It became about accountability everywhere. Meanwhile, Janelle Crockett returned to her office after a long day of meetings. Her staff stood waiting with quiet smiles. One of them said, You did it. She shook her head. No, she said softly. We all did. Everyone who spoke up. Everyone who refused to stay silent. She walked to the window, looking out at the Capitol glowing against the evening sky. The city buzzed with noise, but she focused on the small things, the sound of footsteps in the hallway, the hum of traffic, the steady rhythm of a nation still moving forward. That evening, she gave a short televised statement. Her words were simple. Today the truth found its way through, she said. But this isn't about victory. It's about rebuilding trust in the systems meant to serve the people. No judge, no lawmaker, no leader is above that. Her sincerity resonated across the country. Viewers who had followed the story from the beginning felt a sense of closure. Many said it reminded them that one person, standing firm, could still make a difference. Days later, the Ethics Committee released its final report. It confirmed that Judge Paulton had violated multiple ethical standards and recommended his resignation. By noon, he issued a statement announcing his retirement from the bench, citing personal reflection and the need to preserve public confidence. There was no anger in his tone, only exhaustion. I hope, he wrote, that my mistake serves as a reminder of the responsibility that comes with power. The next morning, his office door was locked, his nameplate removed, and his portrait taken down. The long career that once seemed untouchable had quietly ended. For Congresswoman Crockett, the weeks that followed were filled with both attention and responsibility. She received letters from all over the country, some from lawyers thanking her for defending the Constitution, others from citizens sharing their own experiences with injustice. One letter from an elderly woman stood out. It read, I lost faith years ago, but when you stood in that courtroom, I felt hope again. Janelle read it twice, folded it neatly, and kept it in her desk. The Protecting Voting Rights Act, the same bill she had defended during the hearing, gained new momentum in Congress. Lawmakers who had once hesitated now voiced support. News anchors described it as the Paulton effect, proof that exposure and courage could change minds. When the bill finally passed the House with bipartisan votes, the gallery erupted in applause. Janelle sat quietly at her desk, tears forming in her eyes. She wasn't thinking of the cameras or the headlines. She was thinking of the people whose voices had been silenced for too long, and how, in her own way, she had helped them be heard again. In a quiet part of the city, Judge Paulton spent his days away from the spotlight. Neighbors saw him walking in the park or sitting on a bench reading. Some avoided him, others nodded kindly. He often carried the same small notebook in which he once wrote court notes. Inside it, he now scribbled reflections about humility and fairness. Sometimes he would stop and stare at the courthouse dome in the distance, whispering to himself, justice must serve the people, not pride. His world had changed, but perhaps, in losing everything, he had begun to understand what justice truly meant. Months later, Janelle Crockett was invited to speak at a university law school. The auditorium was full of students eager to hear from the woman who had faced down a federal judge. She stepped to the podium, her voice gentle yet strong. "Courage," she said, "doesn't always roar. Sometimes it simply stands up and refuses to sit down when it matters most. We live in a time when truth can be twisted and power can intimidate. But never forget, facts are patient. They wait for someone brave enough to speak them." The room was silent as she paused, then continued. "If you ever find yourself standing before authority that feels unshakable, remember that integrity is the strongest force in any room." Her words spread across social media, quoted by thousands. That night, she returned home to her quiet apartment. She made tea, opened her window, and let the cool air drift in. The city lights sparkled, and somewhere in the distance, the bells of a church chimed softly. She thought about everything that had happened, the courtroom, the headlines, the sleepless nights, and felt a calm peace settle over her. "It was worth it," she whispered. The next morning, a major newspaper published a feature titled, "The Day Truth Stood Its Ground." The article described how one moment of courage had inspired a national conversation. Beneath the headline was a simple photo of Janelle Crockett walking up the courthouse steps, binder in hand, sunlight on her face. The caption read, "One woman reminded America that power answers to principle." As weeks turned into months, the story faded from the front pages, replaced by new crises and debates. Yet its echo remained. People still shared clips of her courtroom exchange, not as gossip, but as an example of integrity under pressure. Schools discussed it in civics classes. Ministers mentioned it in sermons. It became a quiet part of the nation's collective memory, a reminder that justice, though fragile, could still be defended by courage and truth. And somewhere, in the same courthouse where it all began, a new judge took the bench. On the desk, beneath the official seal, someone had left a small plaque engraved with simple words, "May truth never be silenced." No one knew who placed it there. Some said it was the clerks. Others whispered it came from Janelle herself. But whoever it was, the message stayed, a symbol of what had been learned. In the end, Judge Paulton's downfall and Congresswoman Crockett's courage became more than a courtroom story. It became a mirror for an entire nation, a reminder that justice isn't about titles or robes, but about character. As the years passed, the noise of politics continued, but the echo of that gavel and the calm strength of one voice never truly faded. And for everyone who watched that moment, one truth remained clear. When power meets principle, only one of them stands the test of time. In the end, this story leaves us with one powerful truth. In a world where authority often speaks the loudest, honesty still has a voice. It doesn't need shouting. It doesn't need power. It only needs someone brave enough to stand up and speak it. Congresswoman Janelle Crockett didn't just defend herself that day. She defended the idea that no one, no matter how powerful, should ever stand above the truth. Her calm courage reminded the nation that fairness still matters, and that even one steady voice can make history. If this story touched you, share it with someone who believes in justice and integrity. Tell us in the comments what you think real courage looks like today. Do you still believe honesty can win in a world full of power and politics? Your thoughts matter here. And if you want more true stories like this, stories of courage, truth, and accountability, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss one. Every week, we tell stories about the people who refuse to stay silent, about the moments when truth stands its ground. Because silence only wins when good people stop speaking. Thank you for watching. God bless you, and God bless America.